Thank you, Mark, and thanks for the opportunity to walk through an overview on engagement and briefly a little more specifically about vision and how a vision can affect employee engagement. So we'll probably spend about maybe 20 to 30 minutes. I'll go through an overview and approach and how vision links to engagement, and also touch a little bit upon steps that you can take as a HR professional and as someone helping managers improve the way they run and organize the business. And then finally, at the end of the session, we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers, and just sort of wrap up. And I think Mark will facilitate that. For those who are familiar with GoToMeeting, you know there's a panel on the right-hand side of your screen that you have access to, where you can enter in questions, and those questions can be answered either throughout the webinar today, or they will be answered at the end of the webinar today. And if we can't answer them, we'll come up with an answer and email it to you later if we can't just answer it on the fly here. So so a little bit about that. And of course, we are recording this webinar, so a copy of this webinar will be recorded, and a set of slides will be available on our website next week. So for those who can't make it, who had registered, or if you want to rewatch this or send it to some of your managers to give a bit of an overview of an approach, that copy will be available on our website next week. So without further ado, let's jump into this month's seminar on employee engagement, and particularly using a vision to drive employee engagement. And I'd be remiss if I didn't just touch a little bit on who we are as a company. I know we have a number of clients on here, so for our existing clients, please bear with me. I just have one or two slides on who we are as a company. But I think it's important to understand when we talk about engagement where we are coming from and our perspective. So a little bit about TalentMap. TalentMap's been in business for close to 15 years now, and our whole focus is employee engagement. We run hundreds of engagement surveys annually, collect over 1 million employee surveys each year, and have a range of benchmarks in different sectors, so we can compare organizations against. And we also provide expert advice on survey process and survey methodology. All of the technology we own, we build and run, so it's all hosted by us and managed by us, as well as our expert advice are all done in-house. So that provides our clients with a real good understanding on how to measure and improve engagement, as well as different aspects around engagement. And also briefly, I think it's important to understand, because we are a professional survey research firm, we're closely associated with a number of partnerships and organizations. Two of them up top of the screen are very important. One's CASRO. CASRO is the Council for American Survey Research Organization. And that organization is important because we are bound by a code of ethics on how we do employee research. And in today's world of increasing concern around privacy and confidentiality, understanding and abiding by a code of ethics on survey research is critical. And we're active members in that. We're also active members in the Society for IO Psychology, SIOP. And why that's important is because this organization really focuses on the science of asking the right questions. So it's great to have great survey technology, but if you don't know the questions you're asking and you're not asking them in the right way, you can get all kinds of information from employees, but you're not getting the right information. And we also do a lot of research with the Conference Board of Canada, for example, on employee engagement across a number of different organizations, and an interesting research findings are coming out on that. And we're doing some primary research at the School of Management in Cranfield over in the UK on the fundamentals of the drivers of engagement. So lots of work being done both around the industry level and at the research level. Just a quick sample of clients. We work with a whole bunch of different sectors, and each month I try to outline one particular sector that we focus on. sometimes it's financial, sometimes it's healthcare. This month I put a number of organizations we work with in the association's not-for-profits at the bottom of this slide, and just to show you the breadth and depth of clients that we work with and have got comfortable using Telemap in our approach. So that's the 2-minute commercial. Now I'm going to jump into sort of the meat of the webinar today, and talk a little bit about a vision and how it links to engagement. So I thought, of course, the very first thing is, what is a vision, and why is it important? I think it's important to understand sort of some definitions about a vision and how it all links together. So, for example, why even bother having a mission and a vision and goals and objectives and those types of things? And if you sort of looked at it, a good vision and a mission, values, and goals is a real good tool to guide you as an employee and as a manager and as a workplace in your everyday steps to achieving a great place to work and a great organization. In a way, it's almost like a coach, in that if you have a well-defined vision and mission, they're always there in the back of your head as you're making decisions and as you're deciding on what direction and how to respond to a client or what projects you should take on. So it can really be the ultimate coach if it's designed well. But also, it could also be, if not designed well, a real obstacle to success. It can cause confusion. It could be uninspiring. And in fact, it could be the coach that you want to fire as soon as possible if you don't design it well. So it can be very effective, or it could be very ineffective. So it's important to make sure that you do go down this path, that you do it well. The benefits of a vision, it does things like speeding up your decision making. Whether you're a manager or an employee, particularly when we talk about the workplace today, and as we're pushing accountability deeper down from the higher level in the organization right down to the front line, trying to empower employees to make decisions that are right for the company, they can speed up those decisions and make more effective decisions if they have a clear understanding of the vision of the organization and what's it trying to achieve. So it's becoming more important just for tactics today around getting decisions done and getting work done. It certainly helps you focus resources. If you're focusing in a particular direction, you know where to put your time, your energy, your resources personally and also corporately. It helps you be more efficient. And it really helps, in your actions every day to build towards the future that you've designed, that the future that as an organization you've sat down and said, this is where we want to go and this is the direction we want to be in. So it helps you guide, and that's why I call it a coach. It's someone there, coach you along, not necessarily focusing you day to day, but coaching you along in terms of the right direction. In terms of definitions, you often hear, well, what's a vision versus a mission, values, goals, objectives? There's all kinds of terminology laid out there. And so I thought I'd just spend one minute just explaining our view on that. And there's not exactly, everyone sort of uses different definitions, but there's some pretty good guiding principles. So for example, very top of this slide, what is a vision? A vision is typically a short, inspiring statement of where you'd like to get, and it provides a unified direction for everyone in the organization, and it's a continual source of inspiration. That's what a vision is, and I'll talk a little bit about some examples there in a minute, but that's generally what a vision is. A mission, on the other hand, is different. It's more around how you intend to get there, and particularly by focusing on your strengths, by being best at what you do as an organization, your core competencies, those types of things. Values, on the other hand, are more like guiding principles, which affect how you behave every day on fulfilling your mission. And usually most organizations that have gone through this process of defining their values have somewhere between 4 and 6 values or statements around principles in there. And then finally, all of this cascades down to goals. And a lot of people are familiar with goals. They're key benchmarks or metrics to help you achieve your mission. And they, all goals, they should be quantifiable, using the SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, and so on acronym. Usually they're focused within a 3 to 5 year period. Of course, they can be broken up into sub-goals for different departments, down to different functions, right down to different levels. And good organizations have it broken down where you have metrics right down to the front line. Not all organizations do, but some do. And they've been the ones that tend to be more successful around achieving their goals. And why I say sometimes people interchange these things. Sometimes vision equals purpose, so they call it the same thing. Sometimes mission equals purpose. So a lot of people sort of interchange some of these. Values equal guiding principles, goals could be objectives, and so on, targets. But I think the underlying principle is important, that a vision is an inspiring statement of where you'd like to get, and it provides a unified direction for everyone in the organization and a source of inspiration. And that's really important to engagement, and I'll touch on that in just a little bit. So more specifically, when you look at vision, it's massively inspiring. It really should drive energy, excitement, for the most part, for an organization. It's overarching, so it should cover the whole organization and what they're trying to achieve. It's long-term. It's driven by and evokes passion for the work and for the goals for most of the people in the organization. And it really is a fundamental statement of the organization's values, aspirations, and goals. So it's sort of it's all captured in one statement, and that's really what an effective vision statement or a vision can be. Just a couple of quick examples. Walt Disney's a well-known one, to make people happy. It's a pretty good vision statement, and it's overarching. It's broad. I think it captures a lot of what Disney's trying to do. It probably inspires a lot of people who work there. Nike, on the other hand, to experience emotion of competition, winning and crushing competitors. That emotion again comes up. So these are some good examples of good vision statements. Les Mills, I put this one up because I've been a Good Life member over the years, and go to some of their exercise classes. But they're a smaller company, but just to give you a sense of what they look like, life-changing fitness experience every time, everywhere is their mission and vision that they've laid out. So just to give you some sense, so a vision statement doesn't have to be a big, huge, long document, but it certainly has to be inspiring. Well, one of the things I always like to look at is all right, so we do all these things. Does it actually matter to the business? And we know that, I talked about vision, mission, values, goals can be the ultimate coach for employees and organizations, and can create a great workplace. But there's a growing body of literature, academic and consulting literature, that links organizations that have a clearly defined vision and a clearly defined mission to better business outcomes. And that's important, because you might think, well, that's obvious. Well, it's not obvious. We have a lot of management practices, I think we do every day in all organizations, that have no evidence for support and no evidence to link to performance, but we do them anyways. What's interesting about vision and mission is there's a lot of evidence that shows that if you do have a well-established one, you tend to have much better performance, and in fact, better performance in turbulent times and times of change even. And they also found that having that, it's unrelated to the size of the organization. So small, mid, or large, all of them can benefit from effective vision and mission statements from a business point of view. So that's a little bit about the definitions of vision and mission, and I thought that's important just to understand what are we talking about and where are we coming from. Let me turn a little bit about why it's important, and not only why vision and mission, because we're familiar with vision statements, and we've often seen them on the walls of organizations that we work in, and it's probably on the walls of the organization that you're in today. But I think what we're seeing is it's becoming more and more important, and increasingly important to existing employees and new employees coming into the workplace. Let me just give you an example. Some of you might be familiar with Dan Pink. Dan Pink writes a lot on the workplace and what motivates employees. He wrote a good book a couple of years ago called Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. And what Mr. Pink found out was interesting. What he found out in some of the research that he did is he found out there were sort of three fundamental things that really drove employees and motivated employees. One was autonomy. It sort of had, it says this image on the right-hand side. It's sort of down on the right-hand side. I tried to circle it there. And people want to feel that they have self-direction, they have freedom, they have control over what they're doing, and to some extent. So autonomy was a really important aspect of what Pink found in the research that he did, and look at it, all of the research over the last 15 to 20 years around motivation. He also found that mastery, being good at something, feeling that you're making progress on your work and your work day to day, and that you had this mastery mindset of being better and better at what you're doing, that motivated employees. The third one that motivated employees, the third underlying principle that Pink found out and outlined in his book, was around purpose, about how and why we do what we do. You know, many people found that, yeah, profit was motivating, but just as important was we needed a purpose of why we came to work. We needed to feel like we're doing something meaningful and that we were contributing to the world outside of ourselves. So those three underlying fundamentals were important and identified in the work that Pink does, and we've seen that consistently in the work that we do on employee engagement. And in fact, at the very top, there's a really good video on YouTube that sort of walks you through everything in Dan Pink's book in about, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes or something like that. The link is up there. Of course, it'll be on these slides if you want a copy of the slides. But if you haven't watched this video, it's an excellent little video that just sort of has an animation of what is captured in this book, The Surprising Truth That Motivates. And it talks to you about the importance of autonomy, mastery, and purpose, as well as a number of different other things. One of the other things, just to touch on this one more, Pink talks about, you know, where does money fall into the picture, and isn't that a motivator? People often talk about it. We know from engagement surveys it usually doesn't come in the top 4 or 5 as a key motivator. But the question is why? Why is that? Well, what Pink found out in the work that he did is, yeah, money can be a motivator if the job is simple. So if it's a simple task, you're doing routine work, you're doing piecemeal type work, money actually does motivate in those situations. Meaning the more I do, the more money I get. Maybe in an assembly line type of environment, piecemeal type of work, absolutely money does motivate it. So it's not a blanket statement that money never motivates. It can be motivational in many situations. But what's interesting, what Pink found out, that in complex work, knowledge-based work, and work that most organizations find themselves, or a lot of organizations find themselves doing in Canada, in our service-driven or knowledge-driven economy, money isn't a motivator in a complex work situation. Other things motivate, and that's where autonomy, mastery, and purpose really becomes more of a motivator than money itself. Just to give you a little bit another sense of how things are changing and why vision and purpose is becoming more important to employees. This is a study, a longitudinal study, that's been going on since the 1970s. And it's sort of interesting. Some of you might be familiar with this book, What Color is Your Parachute? It's an excellent book. It really is a great tool as you're trying to explore your career and where you want to fit and what kind of work you want to do and what your strengths are and so on. But what was interesting, when this book first came out in 1970, so did this longitudinal study. This longitudinal study went in and asked employees about what they expect out of work. And from that study, what came up was 23% of the respondents that completed this survey, 23% of the respondents said that they expect meaningful work. In the 1970s, they expect work to be meaningful, meaning, yes, I wanted a paycheck and I wanted a job to go to and so on, and I expected some meaning. So only 1 in 4 people thought that their work should provide meaning back in the 1970s. The same study has continued over the last 30 years, and what's interesting is it's increased in terms of that particular question. What do you expect from work? Now, close to 67% of the respondents expect their work to be meaningful. That means 2 out of 3 people versus 1 out of 4 expect their work to be meaningful now. Almost everybody expects their work to bring a lot more fulfillment than it ever did 20, 30 years ago. So what we've seen is the mindset of our workforce has changed significantly over the last 20 and 30 years, and I think will continue to change in terms of what we expect out of work. I think this image on the right-hand side sort of helps capsulate some of that. If you just looked at the number of books on the purpose of work, the meaning of work, business as a calling, happiness in the workplace, starting with why, Simon Sinek's book, lots of work being done both academically as well as on the practitioner side and business side around the purpose and meaning for work. So it certainly has taken a lot greater life. It's becoming much more important than it ever has. And in fact, millennials, in an interesting study done by Deloitte just in 2015, this year, the study looked across the globe, a whole range of hundreds of HR professionals and executives. And what they found that millennials think the best leaders possess an overarching sense of purpose. Millennials found that one of the important things that drove them to work at an organization or to stay at the organization was the fact that this organization had a sense of purpose, a vision, a mission, and something that they could ascribe to. So it's becoming very important, not just to us day to day, but to everybody. And in fact, it's even more important to the millennials, which are really a big cohort that are starting to enter and are in the workplace today. So that's a little bit, if you sort of look broadly at what's happening out there, I want to turn now to, well, how does vision impact engagement? And you sort of think about, well, let's think about the definition of engagement and the fundamental pillars that make up the concept of engagement. Well, the fundamental pillars are, of course, of how people are connected logically to their job. So that's important. Can I achieve my career, my financial goals here? If the organization has a great vision and is working to strive something and something that is hopeful for the future, employees can check that box. They say, yes, this is a place where I think I can achieve my career and my financial goals here to some extent. Also, employee engagement is made up of an emotional component. How well do my values align with the values of the peers, my manager, the leadership overall? And of course, for organizations that have clearly defined vision, mission, and values, employees can then start to understand where their values align or don't align. So again, just the fundamental definition speaks very clearly to the importance of vision and mission. And in fact, when you look at the definition, employee engagement is a strong emotional and intellectual connection to their job, coworker, manager, and organization. So that vision is in part of what creates that emotional and intellectual connection. So without a clearly defined vision or a well-understood vision, it is going to be certainly hard to start to connect and engage employees when you just look at the underlying definition of engagement. Breaking engagement down a little bit more and linking it to vision, you start to look at, well, what makes up questions on an engagement index? This is Talamap's engagement index. And it's an overall engagement index, but it's based on questions down below, these 6 questions. And you start to look at these questions and you say, well, how do they relate to vision? Well, one is, I'm proud to tell others I work for my organization. If you feel that your vision, the organization has a good vision and a good mission, something you could be proud about to tell others you work there, that affects your engagement. I'm optimistic about the future. My organization inspires me to do my best work. Does this organization that I work for example, have a great vision? Is it something that makes me want to do different work? And you can see all of these questions, or a lot of these questions, not all of them, relate very closely to a strong vision and mission. And if employees understand that mission and vision, first of all, and second, if they buy into it, of course it's going to affect their employee engagement. So in our survey, in TalentMap survey, here are the questions we actually ask on vision. So when we ask questions, we ask these 4 core questions. We have a shared vision of what our organization will be like in the future. So are we all on the same page as an organization? We understand what needs to be done for us to succeed in the long run. Our organization has a long-term purpose and direction, and senior leaders have painted a compelling vision for our organization. Those are the 4 core questions that we measure. And we also ask employees to provide open-ended comments. How could the organization's vision be improved? So we collect a lot of data, but what's interesting, if you look at those questions, if you just took those questions and you try to assess your organization, and if you thought of your organization today, for everyone on the call, would you be able to answer, strongly agree to these questions, or even agree? You know, does your organization have a shared vision? Are you all on the same page? Do your employees know what needs to be done? Or do you guys have a long-term purpose and direction? Are you heading or you keep changing priorities? And how well have the leadership team communicated that vision to the organization? So those are the fundamental principles. When we look at some of the open-ended comments around visions, here's a very common thing we see. People want management to help articulate and clearly communicate a better vision. These are real open-ended comments, just a couple that I grabbed from our survey results. And this is a typical comment, you know, employees saying that the leaders haven't painted a compelling vision for the future of, well, this one's of an agency, of our agency. You know, most of their actions seem to be reactive. They don't seem to be proactive. That's from my perspective. Or priority setting. It seems that everything's a priority in this organization. So without a clear vision, people are not connected to the organization, or they don't know how to use their time and energy well. So just to fit this a little bit together around how does vision fit into engagement? This is a list of TalentMap's high engagement work practices. So of course there's the engagement score that we look at, but we also look at 12 core fundamental practices throughout your organization. In the center of one of the core pillars is your organizational vision. What we want to understand is how you score on organizational vision and how that score relates to employee engagement. So just to connect all the dots for that, when we work with organizations, or when you do anything around understanding your vision around a survey, you should have some questions around organizational vision. And those questions, as well as other dimensions, should have some factor that impacts or drives your employee engagement score. And we know that engagement drives productivity, discretionary effort, and retention, which then drives value for the customer satisfaction, and ultimately, if you're for profit, revenue and profitability, or budget attainment if you're non-for-profit. So you can see, where does vision fit in here? Vision is really the heart and the soul of engagement. It's a beginning of the organization. So you have to get this right, as well as other aspects in your workplace, to help drive engagement. And if you do that right, you're going to drive different aspects like productivity, discretionary effort, and retention, and drive better customer value. So it's sort of a picture of how it all fits together. What we do when we work with organizations is we help you identify the drivers of engagement. This is just an example. If an organization has a strong driver, it typically has a positive correlation. Each dot here represents a sample of a respondent from a survey. The y-axis would be an engagement score. The x-axis, for example, would be your vision score. Those who have a strong correlation, meaning those who score high on vision, also score high on engagement. Whereas those employees, which represent by this little dot here, scores low on engagement, and they also score, low on vision and low on engagement. So there's a very strong correlation between that. That's an example of a strong key driver. Conversely, you could have no correlation. This is a weak driver of engagement, meaning some employees scored high on vision and high on engagement. Some scored high on vision and low on engagement. So there's very little pattern. It's like a shotgun blast. When we work with organizations, we're able to identify where vision fits vis-a-vis all of the other survey concepts that are measured. So for example, in this particular graph, you'll see organizational vision is not only low relative to their peers, but it's far to the right, so it has a strong impact on engagement. So when we looked at all of our data, just to give you a sense of how vision stacks up in our overall benchmark, and this actually covers somewhere around close to 1 million plus employees. So we looked at 1 million employees across 500 organizations, and we ranked order the most important driver of engagement based on the statistical analysis that I just very briefly showed you. Number one was professional growth. Not surprising, it often comes up. People want to learn and grow. They want to have transferable skills. They want to be able to take what they learned and apply it within the organization or be able to apply it somewhere else. So they definitely want to grow, and I'm not surprised at that. The number two most important factor across all of our companies is organizational vision. And in fact, it represented 12.6% impact on engagement, a very high percent of impact on engagement. Followed by leadership, innovation. You can see all of them ranked down to work-life balance, which had a very small impact on employee engagement. So when we looked at what's most important, organizational vision came in the top three, and in fact it came in number two across 1 million employees and across over 500 organizations. So it is very important to employees in all of the data that we see, as well as data that we see outside of organizations. So now, hopefully I built a little bit of a case. What is engagement? And also the importance of engagement, both in terms of general, what we're seeing out there, and also specifically what we're seeing in telemap surveys. It's a real key component of creating an engaged workforce. So what are some ways to improve it? What are some things that organizations could do? Well, I think it's important to, before we just jump into that, why do organizations or managers in particular not really score well on engagement, or not and struggle with getting vision out there? And typically, the number one reason is just neglect. Often managers don't understand how important employee engagement is, nor do they understand that employees need to be part of developing the vision. It's not just a matter of the management team going to an off-site retreat for a day or 2 days, hammering out a vision, communicating out a few times, and we're done. Management needs to understand that it's very important to employees, first of all, and second of all, without a clear understanding of how management got to that, employees will not buy into it. So they need to be part of creating that vision with management side by side as they develop what that vision looks like for the organization. The other reason why we often see is often managers are pretty impatient around that. They might spend months, if not a year, working and developing their visions for the organization. And by the time they're done, they feel that, geez, we've been at it for so long, everyone must know it. And they don't want to invest the time of bringing the employees on board. They feel it's too costly, it's too time-consuming. What a lot of managers seem to be doing is underestimating the real down-the-road impact a clearly aligned organization can have. And they're feeling that, well, if I clearly communicate the vision, they'll buy in, and it's too time-consuming to get everyone on board. The third biggest reason we find is usually, as I mentioned, the vision usually stays at the executive suite, and it's just not communicated well. Managers think it's communicated well because they've been at it and talking about it and working on it for months if they're developing a new vision. But from an employee perspective, it's not communicated usually very well at all. And then fourthly is it may be communicated well, but often the processes that employees work in day to day are not well aligned, meaning we want to serve customer focus might be a key vision of the organization or part of their vision and values. But from an employee point of view, the technology isn't there, or the information isn't there, or I can't find my employee or my client data quickly on the database, so I can't serve my customer quickly. That's an example of a process is just not aligned with the vision, and that can be very frustrating. And then the vision actually becomes meaningless to the employee. So how can you bring employees into the process? And that's what I want to just touch on and sort of wrap up here with. I think one of the most important things is inclusiveness and involvement is key here. So you've got to involve employees throughout the process of developing and communicating your vision. For example, one of the things, if you already have a vision, what I would recommend is you put it out there for comment. So get that out there either on your intranet site, on internal chat mechanisms, on at the head of agendas and meetings or discussions with staff. Get the vision out there and have people comment on it. Have employees talk about it. Have them provide their opinion on what they think that vision and mission means. And it would be very interesting, the dialogue that can start. So if you already have a vision, get it out there. If you're just in the process of crafting or evolving your vision, highly recommend to seek some input. And you know, there's a number of different ways to seek input. Online forums, for example, RBC, Royal Bank, just brought in a while ago a new CEO, and what he did is he was taking over from John Cleghorn, which is a very well-known, well-established CEO, and the new one that came in, Dave McKay, really had to create a new vision for the organization with the direction of the financial service, and he wanted to bring employees on board. And he actually engaged the whole organization, or a large part of the organization, in the dialogue around creating the vision. So if you sort of look at it from a Canadian perspective, the Royal Bank is one of the largest organizations out there. And if he was able to engage staff in evolving and creating the vision, and he saw the value in doing that, I would argue that smaller and mid-sized organizations should have an easier time of doing that type of thing, given the size and the breadth of RBC, and if they are still able to do it. So potential methods to do that: you could use online forums, town halls, whether they're live or virtual, coffee chats, any way to start, and in particular record the conversation, whether through flip notes, Evernote, recordings, whatever it is. Make sure that you start the process. And in fact, understand that if you do start the process, it's going to be driven by what's on the agenda for that discussion, and not necessarily going to be taking the high-level view that executives have. A lot of employees don't have the breadth and understanding of the marketplace, and don't have a appreciation of the competitive landscape, but they do have a very unique input that they can bring to the organization around what they see in the day-to-day, and how that impacts the vision out there. Just to give you an example, Google's a very good example. They actually have a methodology called ORCs, which is Objectives and Key Result Areas, OKRs. Their view on creating a vision for different departments and different lines of businesses that they have is they believe that it should be a 60-40 split. So it's not a top-down process, but a much more of a bottom-up process. They involve frontline software developers, marketers, project managers, engineers on developing objectives and key result areas. And ultimately, when they develop a vision for a particular business unit, 60% of the objectives and key result areas are bottom-up driven, 40% are top-down driven. So it's a very interesting perspective, and they understand that in today's workplace, a top-down driven vision, mission, and objectives will probably not be agile enough and flexible enough to be able to meet today's marketplace. And that concept of ORCs, objectives and key result areas, with a 60-40 split, we're seeing more and more of those used, particularly in certain industries that are needed to be agile and quick. So starting from the bottom up is important. A lot of this stuff can be done in a one-day workshop if the organization is a small or mid-sized organization, or a number of days over a period of time, and they could be facilitated in-house. You can bring outside parties in to do it. But the key thing is, it really is often broken into 3 phases when you have these types of workshops. And this is where you involve employees generating and visioning what they see as a future for the organization. We also recommend the second phase then around goal and objective setting. So not just what's the big picture and where we're going to get there, but how are we going to get there, and what are some of the objectives and missions and goals that we're going to try to achieve. And the third part of effective workshops that we find around visioning and business planning is around action planning. How do you create it relevant to the employee and not just something that goes up to the top of the executive suite and is gone and you never hear from again? So we found that getting employees bought in and connected to the vision involves absolutely the visioning phase that everyone's familiar with, but it also involves the importance of clear goals and objectives that are tied to the vision, and creating specific action plans out of these visioning and planning workshops. Let me just touch on sort of what are some elements of an engaging vision. So one is that it's got to be audacious. So you've got to have something that is, as mentioned before, emotionally and inspiring to the employee. It's something that's got to get your heart racing and say, that's going to be challenging. And in fact, so challenging it may not even be achievable, but it's something that you want to work towards. Also, it's important around a vision is it focuses on what the organization does well, trying to capitalize on their competencies. Other things around visioning, it's got to be looking to the future. And this concept of future casting, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and I already touched on the inspiring and motivating and purpose-driven sense of it, of where it goes. You know, a lot of you might be familiar with this concept, but it still holds true today. This idea of someone walking down the road and they come to a bricklayer and they ask the bricklayer, what are you doing? And he says, well, I'm just laying bricks. And he continues down a little bit further down the road and he finds another person, another bricklayer, and he says, well, what are you doing? And the second bricklayer says, well, I'm building a wall. And the guy continues on a little bit further along, and he comes to the third bricklayer at this job site and says, what are you doing? And the third bricklayer says, I'm building a cathedral. So I think that's really where it drives the differences between, are you just doing a job or are you working to something greater than yourself? And that's really what you're trying to achieve with the concept of vision. Let me just touch on one of those things, that future casting. One of the biggest challenges with creating a vision for and a workshop for employees is generally people have a lot of difficulty projecting themselves into the future. A lot of people have difficulty predicting. They either over-optimistically predict, or they're very bad at predicting what's going to happen in the future. And the part of it is just psychologically, it's hard to predict what the future will bring. It's hard to look into the future. But an effective tool is to have them just sit about, in 5 years from now, thinking back, what is the organization going to look like? Maybe you're writing a press release for the organization in 5 years hence, and thinking back, what does the organization achieve or look like? Or an obituary for the organization. What does this organization look like now that it's deceased and gone on? So that, these are things that are an effective way to help employees actually in these workshops develop development tools to create good visioning statements. One of the things, just a caution, if you do go down this path of getting employees involved, and it's very critical that you do, don't spend a whole bunch of time wordsmithing. And wordsmithing, the words are important, but not to do it in a group setting. Get the key concepts out there, work on them, and then spend some time afterwards wordsmithing out and getting the vision, because doing it in a large group setting can be very frustrating. Here's an example of work we did with an organization in Denver, and this is what they actually worked through. So you'll see what's interesting in the picture is a whole bunch of images, visions, tools. So creating a vision workshop can be very interesting because it involves employees in many ways around something that they have a lot of energy and passion for, but bringing tools like magazines and different props that can help facilitate the process goes a long way to creating an effective workshop, an effective day for that. This is what Denver said they'll be. They'll be recognized as a hub for energy and innovation, a model for advocacy and relationship building, and administrative efficiency and service delivery. And this is a government organization in Denver. Have succeeded in changing policies, reducing protectionism, particularly in agriculture, have the client stakeholder satisfaction among U.S. posts, and be the go-to post and central gateway. So those are some of the concepts that, they can work that out in terms of a particular statement, but those are some of the concepts that came out driven by the employees, not driven by, and what's interesting when you do align that with what the executives think it is, there's often a lot of alignment, but now the employees have a lot more buy-in to the process. The other important aspect about getting your employees on board and aligning it with their connection and connecting them emotionally is you've got to actually not just do the visioning, which is all about dreaming and where we want to be in the future, but you need to bring it down to earth. You need to connect to the employees and the front line. There's got to be something in it for them. And what we found is part of the day in a workshop, for example, would be around visioning, but just as important, the second part would be identifying goals and targets around the key themes that were identified in those visioning sections, looping them back to that. And of course, developing out those action items in concrete plans. So if you say, as a group, visioning, we want to be the most customer-focused or the most customer-centric type of organization, a real effective part of any process around getting employee buy-in is then having them actually create action plans about how they can link that customer centricity to what they do day to day and what's the specific actions that have to be taken at the business level, at the local level, and even at their job level going forward. And then finally, part is on visioning, part is on action planning, and the third part is around communicating and living the vision. And so involving the employees up front is really only step one. An important step is, of course, communicating the vision widely, because not everyone is in these workshops, can be in these workshops. So using tools like, of course, in management reports, in management presentations, town halls, but also we've seen very effective back of the business card vision statements that all employees carry around, wallet cards that are a summary of the workshops and concepts that came out of these things. Posters and frames that have graphical images, infographics are used now a lot, strategy maps that show on how these different components all fit together and tie into the overall vision. And of course, with today's technology, corporate videos, podcasts, and of course stories, all of those well connect employees back. So it's not just a matter of identifying the vision, putting it up on the wall, and finishing it there and maybe talking about it in a few presentations. I think with today's technology and tools, the onus is on, and often HR can be a big part of this, to help communicate out using a lot of different mechanisms and tools. And we know from psychology research that employees connect much better to stories and images and graphics the way our mind works than actual data presentations and reports from senior leaderships. Just to give you a sense, well, what's TalentMap's vision and mission? And I'll touch a little bit about our mission here. Like every organization, we have it, whether it's explicit or implicit, but our mission is to educate managers so that they ask the right questions, analyze and understand data correctly, and act on the results. And a manifestation of that mission is these webinars, for example. We run these webinars, we don't charge our clients for these webinars, and our goal is to help educate managers and HR, who are a conduit often to managers, to understand deeper about how surveys can be used and how aspects of culture can be used to improve the workplace. Another aspect of how we achieve this mission is, for example, we wrote a book, Employee Engagement for Dummies, trying to communicate to managers what's important and why that's important out there. So I'm going to start to wrap up here. Hopefully you got a bit of a sense of the vision, what vision is and how it's defined, how important it is to employees based on some broad demographic trends and social trends. Talked about Dan Pink and his work. Looked at sort of some broad trends out there, and we also looked at Telemap's data that shows how important organizational vision is to engagement across 1 million+ employees. So it's a very key component of organizations on average. I will note that a copy of these slides will be available on our website next week, and also a recording of this will be available next week. So for those who want to download it and view it or share it, please go to our website and you'll be able to access this off of our webinar hosting page where we host all of our recorded webinars. Maybe I'm going to stop there. I'm going to turn it back to Mark. Mark, maybe you just want to touch on where Telemap's going to be in the next couple of months around some upcoming conferences and workshops, maybe just the next 2. And if there's any questions or comments that came in throughout the webinar today.
Thank you, Sean. Very insightful presentation once again. With regard to upcoming events, certainly we'll be in Toronto next week, in fact, at the Human Resources Association conference in King City, and as well as the Conference Board of Canada's conference in mid-December.
I think that's in Toronto, yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, you referred to Daniel Pink's great book, Drive, more than once, and just to let attendees know that the book is available both on Amazon and iBooks for Apple, and it's available at $10 to $12 Canadian currently. It's very helpful. But back to questions. We're just down to a few minutes remaining. Any questions that I'm looking at here? Sean, any further observations from you?
No, and I'm cognitive of everyone's time. I know there's an important day coming up. I think it's called Black Friday, and everyone's probably starting to think about their shopping experience. So maybe if there's no other questions or comments, we'll wrap up there. And we appreciate everyone's chance to join us today. And December, we don't have a webinar in December because we do run them on the last Thursday of each month, and because it is so close to Christmas. But our next live webinar will be in January, and it's on performance feedback and employee engagement. So I thought an appropriate time, given performance management and performance appraisals and performance feedback time for a lot of organizations at the end of the year or in the early part of 2016. So please join us in January. And if we don't talk or see any of you, have a very merry holiday and season's greetings.
And Sean, just lastly, I hope you've seen the comment with regard to small offices. It's really very important to engage staff on this issue with small audiences, and some props coming in terms of the series of webinars being very useful. So thank you again, Sean, and thank you to our attendees, and the best of the season to you all.